Welcome to the second part of our roundtable discussion for the Federal News Network series, Delivering the Tech That Delivers for Government, featuring enterprise infrastructure experts from leading federal systems integrators. I'm Vanessa Roberts, and during this series, sponsored by Future Tech, we are sharing the knowledge of FSI techies who often work behind the scenes to ensure that their employees have the tools they need so agencies can deliver on their missions. I'm back with a great group of guests for this Part 2 roundtable. We have with us today Bernie Tomasky, the Vice President of Enterprise IT at SAIC, Cedric Sims, Senior Vice President of Enterprise Innovation and Integration at MITRE, Eric Nelson, Senior Vice President for CACI's Enterprise IT Operating Group, and Rick Schindel, the leader of Federal Systems Integrator Programs at Future Tech. We left off last time talking about metrics and best practices for success. So let's start off this part of the discussion today with day one readiness. Shall we jump right in, guys?
Very good.
Let's do that.
All right. So let's talk about standing up that new data center or even just a service or facility that's unique to a government contractor. And then maybe a little bit beyond that, share how you manage and the strategies that you create to make that work. And then even beyond that, that continuing need for configuration and upgrades. Who wants to jump in? Bernie, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, obviously for us, it's how do we not have data centers and how do we get everything to the cloud? But the reality is we have, customers that have to maintain stuff on-prem and private clouds. And we've tried to go to a model that's a little bit more like a hyperscaler to where at least from an OEM standpoint, they can provision hardware, new hardware into that environment. So almost creating kind of that hyperscaler environment within the data center. And we're always going to have environments that require SCIFs and development labs that are in classified areas. And that's, I think, a challenge for any contractor to kind of maintain that space. But, really it's all about trying to drive everybody, into a hyperscaler cloud environment.
Right.
So.
I'd say there's two kind of competing things. One is from a day one readiness, a lot of times it's not about creating new data centers, it's about shutting down data centers. So it's consolidations and being able to figure out how to maximize what you do have. Sometimes there are needs for new data center creations. We're seeing that, especially OCONUS, trying to get away from certain hotspot areas, especially in Europe, and creating a new data center. So really it's about the evaluation of what needs to do to move that to an alternate site pretty quickly. So then also from a new requirements standpoint, we're seeing a lot of requirements for like austere location data centers, hardened equipment, being able to get something that actually operates in that environment. Mm-hmm. For example, like a snowball type solution. The problem is that all those features that made it really cool here in the States have to be disabled and don't work as well. So it's being able to figure out how to configure what is available to be out there in that austere location. And you don't have a lot of time to deploy it, so you have to figure out how to kind of MacGyver some things to make things work. So what is important about that is having all the smart people in a room and being able to say, hey, here's how this is going to work here, test it out, pilot, and deploy pretty quickly.
So I think because of the success of the hyperscalers, the OEMs have done a good job in kind of reinventing their as a service model for the things that you need on-prem. We've worked at Future Tech extremely hard over the last couple of years to develop a day one readiness for the systems integrators that takes the bulk of what an OEM provides, but also adds in some specific technology that may be required that the OEM may not offer. So we act as that capability to bring in that third-party technology that the stack is requiring, but the OEM may not be able to provide, and still provide that in an OpEx model. So that's been extremely successful for us. The other thing that we've helped customers do is do that in a 705 compliant capability in a scalable model. We work with a partner called iFortress that can put that anywhere in the world. And it's been very successful in delivering capabilities to customers across the globe. So we're very excited to see where that goes.
Great. We have many of the same challenges that have already been mentioned here. One of the other unique aspects that we have is we have an obligation to our sponsors to be able to provide some compute and capacity that they don't have access to now at scale. As an example, we're building out a fairly significant AI compute sandbox. So suddenly find ourselves building data center capacity on behalf of our sponsors. So that's kind of a new space for us to be able to do that. For our own infrastructure, we're making similar transformations that have already been mentioned. We're moving to cloud, shrinking data center footprint, and quite frankly, bringing us into a much more compliant architecture for future requirements from the government.
Are you finding that when you're working with agencies to get ready for the day one of these projects, that there is a lot of need that they don't have, that you're having to bring to the table for them? Maybe some things that weren't even thought about when these projects were begun.
Well, in some cases, we're making investments ahead of what the government would be making. And some of that's pathfinding, so we get to make the mistakes and find out where the challenges will be. And our intent is to accelerate their adoption of the latest technologies. In some cases, we have obviously ran into some issues in those implementations. And we think that there's a lot of learning that comes out of that. And I think it's been very, very beneficial for our community as a whole.
Right. How are you helping agencies figure out what is right to keep on premises and what's not? I mean, I think that's also a part of the challenge. I mean, there's some things that obviously in the federal government, there's a reason they're on premise. But it's not always everything that's still there that people want to keep there, right?
I mean, sometimes it's the technology and how suitable the technology is for on-prem versus, sitting in an AWS type environment.
Right.
But we really, there are very little, obviously data security is paramount to what the customer's thinking when they typically are on-prem. But by and large, the obstacles they're already facing by having on-prem solutions, they want to get past anyway. So not really running into a lot of resistance. There's always going to be some environments that you're going to have to maintain that way. But the platforms, a lot of these platforms and technologies that are out there now and applications are really been designed cloud first.
Right.
So they're actually going the other direction. They're actually trying to figure out, how do I migrate this app to an on-prem solution for a customer, because that's a requirement. So I think, from my perspective, it's not a hard conversation. You do have to get past all the data security concerns and things. But
I think the other component to that is the ingress egress data
encryption,
moving back and forth, right? If you're not prepared for that, you really you can get surprised pretty quickly. So I think working with customers in order to understand that, it's a big component.
Yeah, two new roles that we've kind of really been adding to the IT lifecycle aspect of things for service delivery are organizational change management, being able to help change the way that we look at things. Look, this data's not, it can move to the cloud. It's not that difficult. We can draw down these parts of the data center. But on the alternate side of that, a data scientist to be able to get, because it's really about the data and the protection of that data that holds things in a certain infrastructure. So being able to plan out, hey, this is the portion of that data that's really important. Everything else around it, we can do something different. So it's really a culture change for a lot of these government agencies, because it's just like, it's easier to classify something than to say, well, only this is classified.
Right. It's like the persona thing in a way.
Yeah.
Right. Let's talk about keeping pace with innovation and kind of how you're trying to do that. I think that data conversation is a huge piece of it, right? Because how do you identify that data? How do you, and in this case of some government agencies, it's a lot of data. AI is obviously part of that story. Talk about what you guys are doing in that area and the things that are exciting to you about some of the innovative things you're doing.
Well, I think for us, it's, clearly everything's going to be driven by AI. That leads to the need for a lot more data scientists and a lot better data security. But, for us, same thing we're trying to do with customers when we talk about mission outcomes and backing into strategy. It's the same for us. We're looking at our customers, what are their missions, what are their mission imperatives, and what technologies may be able to help them in that course of that, right? And then that kind of feeds into our roadmaps, including a Horizon 2 and 3, what we envision, and then we kind of lay out our R&D plans from there. But as you can imagine, AI and analytics and AI automation, because I think a lot of the IT lifecycle is going to start to, you're going to see AI automation play a bigger and bigger role. So it already has in the service desk environment.
Yes.
And it's you'll see it across the network and cyber and everything else as well. So
Even software development, I think.
Yeah. So for us, it's really, what are the mission imperatives of the customers, and how do we back into that what we think we need to spend our investment dollars in over our 1, 2, and 3 year horizon roadmap, and that's how we kind of make our decisions around what innovation areas we want to explore. And like I say, it's not just let's evaluate some third-party tools out there. It's like, let's make some decisions. We even strategically make investments in some companies, which we've done in the past, so that we have a position within that company to actually influence their future roadmap on their products. So that's another strategy we have. But I think it's kind of a multi-pronged effort at trying to identify the technologies. Sometimes they're commercial. How do we get them into a government customer and helping that company with that roadmap? But at the end of the day, it's all about what are the mission imperatives and what technology is going to help the customer get there.
Yeah, innovation is critical to being able to do everything from the standpoint of service delivery, IT lifecycle management. So I actually personally tried to create a culture of innovation in our programs. And one of the things that we did that was very successful was start crowdsourcing from the standpoint of everyone on the program being able to offer ideas of innovation. And we define innovation as not just the big shiny objects that change everything, but anything that you see that we could do better, be more innovative at doing. And program that we have out in AFRICOM and EUCOM, in the last 2 years, they've submitted about 160 ideas. What we do is we reward people. So we have an innovation board that's part of that agile process that evaluates, figure out what's the best roadmap for getting this deployed. Once it gets deployed, that person gets a bonus for it. The top 3, they're put in a case of here's our innovation guys. And the government loved it so much, they said, well, how can we start submitting ideas? So it was kind of getting that conversation going, and in the success there is of those 160, 110 have been implemented, and we kind of track metrics. It saved them about $10 million annually in the past couple of years. So
not so much top down, right? It's just where are the ideas and how can we bring them in?
Yeah.
Well, innovation is our lifeblood at MITRE, and we see AI, as everyone else does, as really being transformative to all that we do. One of the early efforts that we had in partnership with a well-known software vendor, happens to be called Microsoft. We worked very closely with them in the early days of the GPT to stand up some private tenancies so that we could begin to do some exploration with it. Unleashing our workforce is probably one of the fastest adopted technologies that we've had, internal into our infrastructure. But it's being used for things that we could have never imagined. We have network engineers that are taking log data and identifying functions on the network that may not be performing as anticipated. We have some very bespoke capabilities around some of our security logs that come in. And it allows our staff, our talent, to really explore what does it actually mean to approach these problems in a different way.
Right.
And we've seen some really impactful outcomes because of it.
I like Derek's point about innovation not being just tied to the technology, but how you do things as well. So that I think that is critical. We at Future Tech, we helped facilitate one of the first enterprise license agreements with NVIDIA to one of our customers. That was announced a couple weeks ago. They had been leveraging NVIDIA software, and we helped them find a way to do it a little bit more efficiently, and made a big splash with that. So that's kind of a how do we do things a little bit differently that it hasn't been done in terms of helping customers move to AI. We've developed a series of questionnaires that kind of put them where they are on their journey. Are they really ready to adopt it? Are they just in the beginning stages? And that could be different for different parts of the organization, right? You may have one group that is kind of is a little bit further ahead. The other thing that I think that has to be considered is the security aspect of it, right? The large language models benefit, excuse me, because of their massive amount of data that's in it. So you have to protect what that data is and who's going to have access to it. and who's going to be able to see those discussions around it. So that's a huge component to it.
It is an irony of the AI, right?
Exactly.
We want all the data brought in,
Right.
but we're not going to put any of our data back out.
Right.
And I think you do have to do that. The big challenge is going to be everybody is rushing. All the third-party vendors out there are building AI modules. A lot of them aren't really AI. A lot of them are just kind of old analytic dashboards that they're calling
Right.
AI now.
BI, right?
But the reality is there's going to be a time where we're going to have a saturation of little AI pieces and parts across an organization. And what is the AI orchestration going to look like? What tool are we going to use to kind of orchestrate all of that to make sure it's secure? And it's to me that's going to be the next piece is how do we deal with all the vendors already out there today,
Right.
all coming out with some enabling AI feature within their software stack. And so we talked earlier about the overlap, and you get ready for some AI overlap because it's going to happen. So
Absolutely, because everybody just wants to attach that to their solution now.
Well, I think getting back to, you really have to look at, number one, demystifying it, and then the value that it delivers to the end user.
Right.
So a lot of times, I know, for example, in our own company, our operations guy says his very best employee is that AI bot that processes all of our invoices because it costs him nothing, and he does brings in millions of dollars. Right. It's really the point of what's the value it's creating and being able to start with that. Lots of AI ops capabilities in Service Desk to really draw down the mundane tasks and make them much easier to do.
I was actually going to come back to that and that idea that proactiveness in managing everything across the enterprise, right? The ability to actually have more data, of course, but have data about what's happening with all types of devices in your enterprise. Is that a piece that's obviously important to the people who are at this table? I would say yes. And how are you kind of looking at that and that use of both AI and that robotic automation?
Well, I think, and you're absolutely right, it's about being able to gather that data. But the reality is, the traditional way would have been if I'm looking at a load balancer, I notice that I'm at 98%, I manually go in the system and I start making adjustments. And the proactive remediation is really around, I'm going to have software that identifies that problem, and I'm going to have software that makes that change before it ever has to, requires a human to be in the middle of that. So kind of getting away from the looking at dashboards and screens and then making a change and getting that part automated is going to be kind of a large impact. And obviously, if you can remediate something in advance of a user feeling it, you're going to have happier users. So.
Right. Also, just kind of think the ability, we talk a lot about this kind of technology for things like trucks, right? Like we're going to know, this truck's going to need an engine because it's gone this many miles. Right. But you could turn that around and use that inside of an environment for technology.
Yes. Absolutely. I think one of the biggest markets for it is in the sustainment and maintenance operations of existing platforms, right? We have all of these, our government has deployed all of these platforms across their operations, and that will help them sustain that for longer periods of time because you're going to be able to do a ton more in terms of predictive and preventive maintenance.
One of the things that we're anticipating is the advent of some new models that will be trained specifically for these kinds of needs. Smaller models, small language models, or models that have been trained specifically for these kinds of that can run on the edge to be able to be responsive, adaptive, and predictive without having to kind of dial back to a mothership.
Right.
And so we think that that's really going to be transformative as the market matures.
Yeah, I think with respect to AI, I'll give a football analogy here. There's many playbooks out there, and more data isn't necessarily going to help you win the game or even make you move quicker. So you need that coach, that data coach I call it, to say transfer that data into information as to what is the outcomes that we want to do. And I think that's a unique situation now because we're actually moving some of our government customers backwards by giving them too much data. And they're stymied. They do analysis paralysis, and instead of saying, here's what we really need to move forward.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
And they feel they have to make a decision about it, so they take a lot of time.
Give me 3 weeks to read that and I'll get back to you.
Right.
Well, relative to innovation, let's talk just a little bit about the whole idea of navigating the federal procurement landscape, right? Can be a little scary. But also how you do that, meet the tech demands, And also there's a compliance requirement that happens in government that doesn't necessarily happen in the same way with commercial customers. Talk about how you kind of straddle that requirement.
I mean, I think for us, I mean, obviously, we're going to comply with NIST standards and
Right.
and
It's
all
not a
this-
choice,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. So I mean, to me, that's just a standard operating model at this point for us. But there's clearly, when it comes to like supply chain risk, software bill of materials, those are requirements that are going to start to come out that we already are starting to do within our own company as well. So we do a few, any technology that we're looking at deploying, we go through the whole cyber analysis and the software bill of materials to make sure, because a lot of times these platforms are been built in a lot of different places and cobbled together. So being able to go all the way back to the origins are kind of important in that. So yeah, it's a regular thing that we have to kind of chase. But I think when most of your end user population is sitting with a customer, that's just a fact of life.
Yeah, so two things. We find that we have to be a lot more proactive before we place the order to find out if all the pieces of that are together. So we're finding a lot more of our relationship with the program managers to actually our procurement arm and the actual OEM vendors. Do you have 15,000 of these Polycoms ready to go? And being able to understand when and where they can be delivered so that the expectations are set, because a lot of times you have an unrealistic plan, like we're going to deploy these things in 30 days and you can't even get them in 60. Right. So that's one thing. On the alternate side of that, as far as a little bit of procurement innovation, once we have a contract, we really try to make sure that we go in and do alpha contracting with them for new requirements. Sitting at a table and being able to say, here's the requirements, here's what we can do, what's your budget? You get all of that communication back and forth that used to occur through RFIs and RFPs. And then when that RFP comes out, you get a 2-day response. So it doesn't work for new procurements, but generally when you have a BPA or something of that nature, it's really helpful to do that.
Well, as MITRE, we're in a slightly different situation as a not-for-profit FFRDC operator. But from that standpoint, we're in a little bit more of a complex situation. We help the acquisition community develop some of those policies and standards. So we have to sip our own champagne. So we need to make sure that we're just as capable or maybe ahead of what the expectations
so you don't
are
have
in that
this
space.
moment.
Exactly. But it's good discipline. What we're really pushing for is additional agility in the acquisition processes, whether they be DoD or civilian oriented. And quite frankly, and I hope everyone's experiencing it, there's some more flexibility there than has traditionally been in the acquisition landscape. So, but it's a unique problem, but one that's worthy and necessary for U.S. government operations.
Well, I wonder if you all are finding that you have more end users with more complex apps out at the edge. Kind of managing that part of it is also a challenge because, to your point, there's more pieces in more places now.
Right. I think from the procurement landscape, I think it has. I think the technology leaps that we're seeing has enormous potential to make this a lot more efficient. I mean, we've all known that government contracting procurement has really not changed a lot over 30 years.
The far is far.
So I think that there's enormous potential there. We work with a partner called Eternal that specifically does do some things that makes this a lot more efficient. It's a new company that sprung up over the last couple of years, and we see a lot of potential with it in order to bring customers a lot more efficient ways of going through that process. And I think you're going to have to kind of force the government in order to take a step forward in it, but I think it would provide them enormous benefit by doing so.
Well, that's another thing we saw in COVID. Like, if you have to, you can make it happen faster. So, I think some of the challenges, we know they're still there. It's like policy and process and change management, right? It has to
back to your point about personas, and like, it used to be that you would have, we're going to get this little, dead weight laptop, and then we're going to get this one for all the research. They've kind of morphed into, you have to have that capability. If AI is going to be put out at the edge, you have to have the same kind of power. So it's kind of like you're getting a little bit more standardized now because there's much more happening in your hands.
Right.
Yeah.
Even on the phone.
Right.
Yeah.
The choice of devices seems to be more standard. The flexibility is on the back end of what you can actually deliver to the end of them based on their personas, right?
And the infrastructure to support that connectivity. Which
We've
is
heard a lot of times over the last 20 years that the PC is dead, and the PC just keeps on rolling.
Let's talk. We've leaned into it several times, both in our first discussion that we had for round one, but in round two we've talked about it too. That security aspect. We've kind of, hedged around a little bit, but that's just fundamental to all of it. I mean, it's always there all the time, right? Talk about that now, today, and kind of how you're managing that with the distributed workforce.
Look, it goes, I think, a lot further than we've ever had to look at this. I think we know about the traditional methods that we've had to approach this from protecting our infrastructure. But there's some unique aspects of the workforce now that require new approaches with respect to security and data. And the advent and the displacement of data and its integration with infrastructure now is a fundamentally different kind of equation that we have to solve for.
Abstracted them.
Yes, very, very complex. And then, and since we've touched on AI a couple times, what we consider security and how we pull that into our infrastructure, what AI means when we pull that into our infrastructure in its unique way, we don't want that to be the Trojan horse, in the infrastructure. So I do think it's going to require some new approaches to the way we address security, more so than our traditional support we've gotten out of our CISOs. So we're really challenging the security community to look at these challenges differently.
Maybe you all can touch a little bit on how you interact with the security teams to do that. I mean, I feel like today that everybody has to always, it's everybody, right?
Right.
A lot of time you hear the term job zero, right?
Right.
For cyber.
Yeah.
Maybe you guys could talk about that a little bit.
Well, go ahead.
I was going to say, from a deployment standpoint, obviously, the traditional approach, which was security, was at the back end of implementation. Those days are gone, right? They're up front in discovery doing the evaluation, and they're staying with us through the entire development and implementation process. So, I think that change has probably been one of the thing that's kind of made us more secure, because we're all doing encryption and two-factor authentication and all the traditional things you wouldn't need to do, right? But where I think there's still a lot of ground to cover is around role-based access. We still open up our data. You can protect data at the source, but ultimately, if you're allowing everyone to access that data, getting to the point where we really can do role-based access to where we're only letting certain people see certain applications is going to help further, stop the spread of a potential, problem. But so there's absolutely areas that I think we all can still improve on with our customers.
Yeah, and of course, zero trust is the big conversation. So we have another Y2K on our hands as far as a mandate, and it's interesting because if you truly are doing zero trust, you have zero functionality for the end user. So you've got to have that balance of what are the requirements and the needs. And getting back to personas, I think you're starting to get security personas, because depending on the high value target that you're talking about within our, we have a lot of our customers that are targets. So you have to know different kinds of personas and how well you want to protect that end device. That's a conversation that has to be had before you start rolling out something. And I know we've created a actual plug-in to a ServiceNow that allows you to look at all the products. We've evaluated 150 products out there. If you want to do this stack, then these are, let's leverage what you already have to be able to implement the policies, because it's the policies that are going to protect you, not some magic installation. So.
Right. I think that role-based piece tied with what you're talking about just now, Eric, is where that's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
And what's interesting, I think, too, is that data access thing. It's not like, oh, this is my job, so I have access to all of these things. This is my job, and when I'm doing this thing, I have access to that
within
data.
an application, even, yeah.
Right, and that's where the complexity really goes through the roof, to be honest, because obviously now, if I'm using multiple apps, I have multiple things that I need to do, but I'm only going to be able to use this app to do this thing when I'm doing this part of this job, right?
And there's also a drive for software as a service solutions, which is great. The challenge you have is those environments tend to be protected by that vendor, and they don't share out their security
Right.
incident information.
Right.
And a big part is understanding your whole attack surface. So I need to understand what's hitting my SaaS environment as well as my other corporate applications. So negotiating into a SaaS agreement that they will provide certain security data back to your security teams is important, because quite often, they're not sharing
Right.
a lot of that information about how they're being attacked from a.
They're self-interested not to.
Exactly. So that's where, we kind of push to say, make sure you negotiate certain level of security data being passed to your cyber teams as well. So
I also think there's a generational component to it as well, because starting about 10 years ago, we have a workforce that grew up with technology from the beginning, right? We all started adapting it at some point in our lives. I'm not going to say when, but it wasn't, in third grade. And this generation in the workforce now did, right? That's all they've known. So I think that there's a component of it that we have to keep in mind. I think they'll provide some innovative strategies going forward, because it's embedded in what they do.
One of the other interesting security aspects is also to consider what is known about your infrastructure, because we are moving so much to software as a service and other platforms. And so I think there's times that there are things that we don't even know about our own infrastructure that now a third party actually does, as a result of the special kind of access or care that we've given to allow them to carry that for us. So I think that's another thing that needs some additional look and visibility and transparency as we go forward.
Right. Well, that's that supply chain risk management piece, right? And the SBOMs, and that's going to always be a living thing. It's not a one and done ever, right? Yeah. And I think maybe AI will ultimately help with that to a degree, right? Because it'll be able to be helping you do those things all the time. I mean, that's the real challenge. Can you do this stuff in real time, right? Well, I want to really thank you guys for this, but before we go, I want to have one more question, which is really talk for a few minutes, just what's on the horizon for each of you? What's exciting, and what do you see happening next for lifecycle management in your organization? You want to start?
Sure. We are extremely excited about the changes that the industry is going through, right? We see a global business where companies such as yourselves are working with governments across the globe in order to provide solutions that are going to move mankind forward. We find that extremely compelling. The technology, as I said earlier, is changing at a pace that we have not seen in, I guess I would put it at the change that we went from the mainframe into the client server architecture. We're kind of in that pace of change at this point, right? Things are just going incredibly fast. So what technology is going to be able to do for us as we try and solve these problems is thrilling to us. We love being in the mix of that.
Well, it is a really an exciting time regarding innovation, change, the evolution, the cycle that we're on right now. If you think about a typewriter in the 1980s, it's probably about the same as a typewriter in the 1990s, right? But if you think about compute 10 years ago versus what we have compute now, it's mind-boggling. So if you think about in the next couple of years, what's next? So probably the most exciting thing that we have at MITRE is we've got a special partnership with NVIDIA, where we're building an AI compute platform to begin to train some new and unique models, things that I don't think traditionally industry would need to or want to do, but we think it'll be very, very impactful for our sponsors. And so that's probably one of the most exciting things. So we get to do the day one data center stand up and get that up and running. And the team's really excited. So it's a marvelous time to be here to do this. Thank you.
Well, for me, it's probably two things. Clearly, customers are now demanding innovation. They're demanding proposals. I think we're past the days of just give me the low cost bidder and that's what I'm going to award to, right? But it permeates every conversation with customers now. They want, when you are showing them a tool, or any kind of platform, they want a demo. So oftentimes in a sandbox, they sometimes want it with their data. They want to prove it out, basically.
Right.
So the whole procurement cycle is changing quite a bit now to where, and that makes it just a lot more exciting than just I'm bidding 200 people to go do something for you. They're all asking for innovation, so they're way more forward thinking than I've ever seen them in the past. So that's one area. And the other for me is, I think as customers started to adopt cloud, that was probably the first time they really were buying a bundled service. They had a lot of legacy data centers, old tools that had long ago been purchased, older equipment that might need refreshing every few years. But when they started going to cloud, it was a case where I don't know how many AWS resources support my environment.
Right.
I don't know anything about the refresh and how that's going to happen. They've turned all that over into a consumption-based model. And I think they had great results with that. And they now want to start applying that to other areas of IT. And my whole career has been in the IT managed services sector. So it's great for me because we now have customers who are really looking at EIT as a service, right, or device as a service, and it's, I think, largely based on how well they enjoyed the benefits of a cloud hyperscaler model, and it'll be challenging because they still have a lot of that work spread across a lot of different contractors, and they're buying hardware themselves, and they just bought a tool and somebody's got to support it, but they're getting there and they're thinking through that whole paradigm of how do I deliver managed services to end user? How do I go to a consumption model? How do I avoid these large capital expenditures? I don't need to do a device refresh every 4 years of every single laptop. Why don't we do that in a smarter way and let a vendor just deal with that? So, to me, the elements around driving innovation right now in the procurement cycle and really focusing on real EIT as a service, capabilities is what gets me excited.
Eric, you want to bring us home?
So sure, we're really focused on it sounds kind of mundane, but it's really important, I think, to this whole conversation, which is getting our customers to that true enterprise level deployment. I think the Air Force ITES is one example of that. We just moved 200,000 airmen to a single point of service desk. 600,000 more coming on next year. So truly getting those 800,000 airmen on a common platform, that then allows that insertion of AI ops, being able to then drive the efficiencies out of it. Versus, I think in the past, I've always seen, I've worked at 3 SIs, taking those pilots and trying to sell somebody on it, and then or an OTA, and let's do this, and then it dies on the vine and it doesn't go anywhere. So our focus is really enterprise. Another example of that is like for the Army and really zeroing in on software-defined networks and get that out there. So true CSFC platforms and the things that they need are available.
Thank you. This was great. I really appreciate everybody coming in today to talk to me. It was awesome. It was awesome.
Thank you for facilitating.
Yeah, it's great.
So fun. So I just want to thank everybody here today, my guests, and I hope everybody who's watching really enjoyed it and who's listening enjoys it as well. My guests today have been Bernie Tomasky, the Vice President of Enterprise IT at SAIC, Cedric Sims, the Senior Vice President of Enterprise Innovation and Integration at MITRE, Eric Nelson, Senior Vice President for CACI's Enterprise IT Operating Group, and Rick Schindel, the leader of Federal Systems Integrator Programs at FutureTech. To check out more of our series, Delivering the Tech That Delivers for Government, including the super informative part 1 of this roundtable, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search FutureTech. I'm Vanessa Roberts. Have a great day and see you soon on federalnewsnetwork.com.